Okay, but good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to attend this conference in the DataSeal community. I'm one of the many newcomers to DataSeal, so I'm really looking forward to learn more about DataSeal, get some insights also in the application of this technology in various projects. As some of you might know, I have recently, together with Anne-Marie Nybo Andersen from the University of Copenhagen, received funding for an interdisciplinary project with the title Taking the Analysis to the Data, where we will explore opportunities and obstacles of using federated analysis of real-life data from European cohorts, and this will also include an ethical legal analysis of using DataSeal to facilitate such analysis. So it's very exciting. We have not started yet. We have our kickoff conference next week, and some of you will attend and speak on our conference. So we are all looking very much forward to get started with this. So as you can see, the topic of my presentation is concerned with the ethical legal aspects of federated analysis in and outside the EU. And this is a topic I have worked a bit upon in another EU-funded project. The EU stands for PM project, where we are trying to develop a standardization framework for data integration and development of in silico models for personalized medicine. And this also includes an ethical legal part, where we try to provide recommendation on suitable legal and ethical standards, which can enable data sharing across borders. But as I said, the DataSeal is new to me, so I'll see how I can try to address some of the ethical legal aspects already at this point. So this is an outline of my presentation. And as you can see, I've also put a map on the right-hand side. And this map is a map of Amager, which is a neighborhood in Copenhagen, where the university campus is, where I work, and actually also where I live. It's also where the airport is located, if some of you have visited Copenhagen. And it looks quite straightforward. If you look at it, there is some green areas and residential areas with roads and etc., and a big wide area. The thing is that I constantly get lost at Amager. I mean, I can't find my way, I can't navigate, and I can't really explain why. And I have exactly the same sense when I'm navigating in this complex ethical legal landscape that we are discussing and exploring today. I know all the small bits and pieces, but when I have to navigate, I always get lost. So I think it goes for many people that it is a very complex situation. It's not only concerned with the GDPR, which is a complexity in itself, but also with border issues like patients' rights legislation, research ethics legislation, various national laws and regional laws, etc., etc. So there is a lot of complexity, and we simply need to explore it together and see if we can come up with some directions in this complex landscape. So I'll say a little bit about this complexity, and then I'll also say a little bit about the GDPR. And I know that DataSeal is a technology which try to sort of work around the obstacles which GDPR is perceived to give all of us for data sharing. But still, GDPR is important also for analysis using DataSeal. And what is maybe most important is to know a little bit about the rationale of the GDPR, because many are very upset about the GDPR, and I think that it's like, very intentionally almost damaging and putting a stumbling block for research. But clearly there are some challenges for cross-border data sharing, both within and beyond Europe. And the question is whether federated analysis, as provided by, for instance, DataSeal, could be a good solution to these cross-border data sharing obstacles. So I will look a little bit into this question, and then I will also say a few words about broader ethical legal aspects of federated analysis, which sort of moves beyond the GDPR. So first to the complexity, and there is a lot of complexity. First of all, if you look into the data sources, we're dealing with so many different data. I mean, data from patients' file, we data from patient registers, we have genetic data, we have imaging, we have tissue sample, which is also perceived as a kind of data. And the thing is that there may be different ethical and legal concerns for each of these data. I mean, genetic data is often perceived to be more, need more protection than other kinds of health data. We have tissue samples in many countries. You have special legal regulation on tissue samples and biobanks, et cetera, et cetera. So it all makes, so the number of sources also gives a lot of legal and ethical complexity. And the same goes if we look into where we actually collect these sources, the context in which these sources are collected. So we have data collected in a clinical setting when patients visit the GP or the hospital to get treatment. We have data collected in research projects, participant in big cohort studies. We use all kinds of administrative data, not only health administrative data, but also a lot of socioeconomic data. And again, we will see that there are various legal and ethical regulation for these different contexts, which add to the complexity apart from the sources in itself. And then we also, when we are dealing with data crossing borders, we also have various regional frameworks and national frameworks, which also gives a lot of complexity. We just need to acknowledge that this is how it is. It is a complex legal and ethical landscape. It is something that we need to deal with. And the question is whether we can actually find some suitable avenues where we can do our research. So what about the GDPR? Well, everybody knows about the GDPR. Very few persons knew about its predecessor, the directive, which has actually been in force since 1996. But the GDPR came into force in 2018. It's quite a new instrument. It's a legal instrument, and it regulates the processing of personal data within the EU and also to countries outside the EU. And the processing is defined very broadly as anything you do with your data: collection, storage, use, transfer, archiving, destruction, etc. So it is, as a legal instrument, it's binding not only for governments, the member states, but also for individuals, public authorities, and private companies, as long as they're processing personal data, and we'll get back to the personal data. And maybe most importantly, and maybe this is why GDPR is so well known by everybody, non-compliance with the GDPR is subject to very severe sanction, mostly economic sanction. So everybody knows about it because of the sanctions, one could say. Okay, so what was the idea behind the GDPR? Well, if we look into the introduction to the GDPR, we get a little bit of impression about the overall idea. But before we dig into it, it's important to know that the EU as such has the overall aim to enable, to facilitate, to promote the free flow of persons, services, and goods across borders. And this also goes for data. I mean, data could be a service, it could also be a good. All kinds of obstacles to the free flow of anything is actually against the overall raison d'etre of the EU. And it also goes for the data. And as you can see here from this quote from the introduction, they stress that differences in the level of protection in the member states may prevent the free flow of personal data throughout the Union. How come? Well, you can imagine that we have, before we had the directive, but also after the directive, we had in all EU member states, we have national laws protecting privacy and data and data confidentiality and so on. But these laws were not aligned. There were different perceptions about how much protection and how we protect it in the best manner. And it meant that every time that you had to share your data, for instance, with a research group in another country, you needed to ensure that in the other countries, they would also comply, live up to the level of protection in your own country, because this is what you have promised the citizens. I mean, for instance, in Denmark, the parliament had a law, promise the citizen, we will take care of your data in this and that way. So of course, also, if you export data to another country, you need to be sure that they will be protected to exactly the same level of protection as you have promised. And because it was difficult to ensure this protection, it meant that very few data could actually be shared. It was very difficult to share these data. This is also what you can see here. It constitutes an obstacle. These differences constitute an obstacle. So the idea of the GDPR and also the previous directive was actually to introduce common harmonized restrictions on the flow of data in order to enable flow. It seems a bit like strange, but this is actually the way that it works. We have common restrictions, and then nobody can say that we can't share our data because now we have agreed on a common level of restrictions. So far, so good. This, in fact, should enable sharing of data for research purposes. Okay. If we then look at how GDPR looks at sharing data specifically for scientific purposes, we can also see that GDPR actually is very research friendly. Normally, there are some very strict rules about if you collect data for a specific purpose. For example, if data are collected in the clinic for treatment purposes, you can't use them for other purposes. This is called a purpose specification principle. But the GDPR says that, well, the purpose specification principle does not apply if you use the data for research purposes or statistics, because these are very important. I mean, it's very important that we can facilitate new knowledge and that we get this insight. So for whatever purpose you have collected your data, you are always allowed to use them for other purposes. So this is actually rather important. And GDPR has also specific provisions which permits the use of data for research purposes. But it actually leaves it to national law to decide specifically about to which extent should it be allowed for researchers to use data and which safeguards would be in place for ensuring a sufficient level of protection of the data when they are used for research purposes. So in a way, it looks very good. However, in reality, this, I mean, when leaving it to the member states to make more specific provisions, you actually create these national differences that GDPR actually served to overcome by having these harmonized level of protection. So what we are facing is national differences in legal basis for processing of data for scientific purposes, which clearly is a significant obstacle for data sharing. So it's not actually the GDPR which is an obstacle, because GDPR is really trying to enable the free flow of data. It's the differences in the national laws which makes it difficult. So could federated analysis be a solution to these challenges? And here I taken DataShield and I hope that I have understood it correctly as an example, because the beauty here is the data can, I mean, you bring the analysis to the data. So you see, okay, you use this analytical framework and then data can be processed nationally, completely in compliance with the national laws in the individual countries. Of course, you also have to be compliant with GDPR when you do it, but still the particularities of national laws can be dealt with nationally. And then you are only sharing summary data, which we perceive would be non-personal data and not cause any kind of problems from a GDPR perspective. I'll get back to it. And then we ensure a very high level of data security, which is also an important feature of the GDPR. So, but there are still some issues which need to be considered. I mean, first of all, are you sure the summary data are non-personal data? I'll get back to what could be where there could be some problems. You also need to be sure that the sharing of summary data is actually compliant with national regulation. There may be national laws which actually regulates also sharing of summary data, or there might be other issues. For instance, in a research project, have you promised your research participants that the data will never be shared with people, with researchers from other countries, or with private business or whatever? So there might be some legal and ethical complications, even though that you have sort of transformed these data into summary data. And then there might actually also be other ethical and legal aspects beyond the GDPR issue, which needs to be addressed. So let's move on and look on these potential stumbling blocks here. So the question of whether summary data are personal or non-personal data needs to be assessed based on the definition of personal data in the GDPR. And there is a very long and comprehensive definition, and I'll walk you through it. So personal data is defined as any information concerning an identified or identifiable person. So it also includes pseudonymous data, which many researchers often think it doesn't, because when they're pseudonymous, you can't really you can't really immediately identify the person. But as long as they're identifiable because there is a key and somebody can get back to the person, they are personal data. So, okay. So what does it mean whether a person is identifiable? Well, here the GDPR says that account should be taken of all the means reasonable likely to be used to identify the person directly or indirectly. Okay. What would reasonable likely mean? Okay. We move on. To ascertain whether means are reasonable likely to be used to identify the natural person's account should be taken of all objective factors, such as the costs of and the amount of time required for identification, taking into consideration the available technology at the time of the processing and technological developments. Okay, so it means that you really need to consider whether there is an available technology which could be used to identify persons based on the summary data, or there might, or in visits, could there be some technological developments? And if these technological developments happens, you need to reconsider whether you can actually still use your summary data, whether they're still non-personal. Yeah, one could say that, if you look at the person up there, could you find this person in this masses of persons down there? I think probably you could. It depends upon whether you put some kind of identifier on her. So it just demonstrates that it might actually still be possible to find persons even in summary data. But if it's not possible to identify the person, then we're talking about anonymous data, and they are not covered by the GDPR. And I guess that the general perception is that summary data used in data shield are considered to be anonymous. And I don't have the knowledge to assess whether that is true or not, but I just give you these inputs for further consideration. Yeah. Okay, so let's say that everything is fine with the GDPR. Are we then done with all the ethical and legal issues which could be raised in regard also to federated analysis? And here I just want to mention a few issues which could still need to be considered, because there might be in these countries we're talking about patients' rights regulation, which actually provides some duties or obligations that you need to take into consideration. Informed consent issues, confidentiality rules, special confidentiality rules, which also sort of moves beyond what the level of protection provided by the GDPR. So even though it's fine with the GDPR, you still need to consider whether there may be some patients' rights regulation which could impede the use of data also in a summary data context. in some countries, for instance, confidentiality between the GP and the patient is so important, or data from a patient's file are so well protected that it's actually quite difficult to use them without the clear and express consent of the patient. There could also be research ethics regulation, which needs to be considered. Again, you could have informed consent. What informed consent is, what do you actually promise the participant? There is a right to withdraw from research projects, which could also be difficult if your data has been turned into summary data. How can you then withdraw from the further use of them? There could be conditions stipulated by the research ethics committees about further use of the data, which you also need to take into consideration. And then you would also need, I mean, maybe increasingly to look into whether there exists some return of findings regulation, which actually give you as, you know, as a responsible, if you are responsible of your patient or of a cohort of research participants, if there is an obligation actually to return results from your analysis, you may actually ensure that the analysis you make enables these return of findings, which again could be difficult if some findings occur potentially when you are dealing with the summary data. And then there could also be like some broader ethical legal issues, which has more to do with the impacts of federated analysis. I mean, federated analysis also produce results, maybe they are anonymous, you can't identify the persons behind, but they might expose particular groups to stigmatization and discrimination, which is also an ethical issue which needs to be considered. I've also put intergenerational issues. How should data collected from minors be addressed to respect their autonomy and privacy? If you're talking about adults, you can inform them about the further use, but if data has been collected from minors, this is an issue which is almost invisible in many countries, that there are adults walking around not knowing that a lot of data has been collected about them when they were kids. And then a third issue could be, you always need to think about how your research design affects trust in science and society. I mean, even though it's completely compliant with all rules and regulation, it might actually have a damaging effect on trust in science and society, which is definitely needed if we want to be able to continue to do our research. We are in many ways navigating in a very complex and legal ethical landscape without any clear answers. We're also navigating between the FAIR principles, which is definitely, as you know, promoted by the EU. But at the same time, the European Union, the EU also promote excellence and trust in science. And so if you look into the white paper on AI, and if you look into the ethical principles developed for the development and use of AI, you can see that a long list of principles which needs to be taken into consideration to ensure what the EU frame as an ecosystem of trust. So we should not only have an ecosystem of excellent research, but also a regulatory framework which can create an ecosystem of trust. So human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance. I think that these are all issues that DataSeal can sort of tick off. Yes, we're fine on this. Transparency, I guess, maybe not. I mean, you have done a lot of reach out work to interest groups, etc., which enables transparency. Reflections regarding diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being and accountability. I think, I mean, what I know about DataSeal is you're actually pretty good on all these criteria. And I would say that you almost have front runner when we're talking about including a broader ethical legal framework into your the device, into the DataSeal device. But it's still, I mean, it is definitely a balance. But as you can see, Philippe Petit, who balanced between the two twin towers, he succeeded. And I think it should also be possible for us to succeed in this endeavor. Just briefly, I will also mention that the EU, the Commission, is actually aware of these challenges we have with data sharing, and they have now proposed a new regulation, what they call an EU Data Governance Act, which will create a framework for sharing personal and non-personal data from a number of sectors, and they will create a number of European data spaces, which would be compatible with data protection and intellectual property rights, data sharing infrastructures, and also a data altruism consent figure where people can European citizen can voluntarily donate their data for free use for various kinds of purposes. And it's, in a way, it demonstrates that maybe they have realized that the GDPR, which in many ways provides a nice framework, but is sort of, it was in other ways from the very beginning sort of outdated because it didn't really envisage or didn't really embrace the big data analysis, which was already going on at the time when it came into force, and it really has difficulties dealing with these big data analysis. So another a new governance act on top of the GDPR and all the other directives. I'm not really sure that this would be a solution on the data sharing needs, but maybe more an additional layer of obligations and add to the complexity. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of this. Okay, so if I should give my own ideas about what a model for ethical, robust, and sustainable data sharing should look like, I would focus on this model for solidarity, which has been promoted by or introduced by Barbara Prinsat and Alisa Buix in their book or report, Solidarity in Biomedicine and Beyond. And I've been very inspired by it because I think that they really pinpoint some of the most important both social and ethical aspects which needs to be taken into consideration. So they define solidarity as an acted commitment to accept cost to assist others with whom a person or persons recognize similarity in a relevant respects. And what they propose is that we need to ensure that people know that they have contributed with data and samples for research. So that would sort of be their first and the most important part of their model. You can't sort of just take for granted that people are solidaristic. This would be the typical Danish approach. I mean, people support research. We know that Danes are very solidarity minded, but actually you don't know before you have asked them. And this is their point. People should know that they have contributed with data and said, yes, they should make a voluntary commitment. It could be a broad consent, that would be fine with them. Then the second point would be that data samples must be used in a way which creates social value. So it should be something that researchers should consider. How does this create social value? And it's not only publicly funded research which can create social value, it definitely goes both for private and public-private use of data. There should be a focus on risk minimization, which DataSeal, for instance, has a clear focus on. And it should be based on, partnership, veracity, and transparency. There should be also some kind of reciprocity involved. Individuals should have access to raw data and return of results. So there should be something also to give back to those who have contributed in a broader sense. So this is my attempt together with a colleague, where we try to sort of provide some building blocks for balancing between the tensions, which will always be there between paying attention to individual rights, but also to the broader societal and interest in promoting science for the benefits, not only on the individual, but also on all the individuals together. So I think it's very important that we acknowledge that there are these tensions, and that there's a lot of, that we are honest about it, and that there is a lot of transparency. We need to engage people, reach out, and for patients groups and potential research participants, we need to ensure that what we do is creating social value. I think the idea about an informed board consent is good. It has some shortcomings, especially when we are talking about vulnerable groups who actually can't give a board consent, and it also means that we need to have special attention to vulnerable groups. Also, the vulnerable groups may look different at data gathering than the majority part of the population. We know that also from research done in the context of data shield, but also we know it also from the COVID, our COVID experience. A vulnerable group are naturally more skeptical towards both vaccines and also sharing of data. And we need to share results with other researchers, but also share them with the people who have contributed. And then we need to pay a lot of attention to the risk of discrimination and stigmatization. And I think that concludes my presentation. I thank you so much for your attention, and I put here some acknowledgement to the project, which has provided input and inspiration for this presentation. So there should be time, I think, for both questions and comments now.
Thank you, Mette. That was really good. I'm sure if we were in person, there would be a rapturous applause in the room. But, take that as read for now. So if anyone has any questions, if they could raise their hand. Oh, we've got somebody already. Oh, lots of people. So I think Madeleine's hand went up first. So I can unmute her.
Ah, fantastic. Thanks, Ollie. Mette, that was fantastic. I mean, to me, having sort of been around and about DataShield for some time, it's really quite, well, in one way, really refreshing to hear the acknowledgement of the complexity that is here underneath the ethico-legal. It is not a straightforward or an easy thing to do. And I think actually your talk and your acknowledgement of this complexity raises for me, I guess, some challenges, not in a bad way, but some challenges for the DataShield project that I think really, I loved, Becca, your Marvel stages, the DataShield universe. So for me, what this talk has been saying is that there are some challenges that are upcoming, some that we have thought about, but some that we now need to really take seriously. And okay, so from a social science point of view and from a sociologist point of view, I'm going to put up my hand for all the social stuff. And so taking what you were saying about, from Barbara Prainsack and Boix's solidarity concept, and taking the acknowledgement of the risks of discrimination and stigma and reproducing of inequalities and all of this sort of thing, while DataShield in and of itself does not specifically raise those issues necessarily, the work that is done using DataShield may very well do so. So if the work of DataShield, for the varying analyses that are ongoing, no one now in a responsible data sharing environment can say, oh, we didn't do that bit. We only created the atom bomb. We didn't drop it on anyone. Now, obviously, we're not talking about anything quite as dire, but there are some really important issues about not only the social value of the work that gets done with and through DataShield, but also the social effects. So how do we then, so I guess this is the challenge that is necessary for DataShield going forward. How do we then take seriously those challenges? How do we then take seriously the potential contribution to risk, to negative impact? And how do we take seriously the need for an alignment with social values? So how do we, so if DataShield doesn't move the data, if DataShield doesn't actually make any of the data available, great. But what if the uses are uses which, as you said, create stigma, which are not acceptable, which go beyond the expectations for which the people who are the data the data contributors have expected of their data uses? What then do we do? So it's not necessarily a question for you, Mette, but it's a question for DataShield as a whole. And there is an expectation from those who give their data, who make available their data, whether they be participants of studies, patients in health systems, or public members of the public who allow their data to be used. There is an expectation, a duty of care. Care not in a legal sense, but care in a social sense.
Yeah, thank you, Madeleine. And thank you also for all the input you have provided to your articles. And we also had a chat the other day. So it has been so inspiring. I think that, this is sort of a general issue. You have a technology and it can be used and misused. It can be used. You can't really take responsibility, but in a way you can. And I think that you already do, because as far as I've understood, for instance, summary data, if you are sort of stratifying individuals into very small group and very particular groups, it may easily expose them to discrimination. It may even make them identifiable. And as far as I've understood, you have taken care of this. In the way that you are designing that DataShield is designing the analytical framework, they have some, technical requirement which sort of impedes this kind of situation to occur where you have this issue. So that's one thing you can do. You can do things with the technology in itself to avoid some of these issues. The other thing you could potentially do may be to sort of put up requirement or sort of a checklist for users of DataShield. When you're using DataShield, we have this, we have these ethos or whatever you would call it. So please think about what this could mean for this and that and this and that. So that could be like another way, sort of raising awareness, but because you can't really control what is the use of DataShield once it is taken into use by other persons. But what you can do is actually raise awareness in the community and for those who uses it. So I think that would be, my response to this. But and that could also be fun to develop an ethos or some guidelines.
Great, thank you. We've got another question from Benedict.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Mette, for your presentation. It was really brilliant. I have, my name is Benedict and I'm a statistician working in Sweden, Karolinska Institute, and we have, we work in collaboration within the Nordic countries, and we would like to use DataShield, but so far we have not succeeded, I would say, to use it, and we usually share data, but we have some issues because, for example, we use register data, and in Denmark, these data are in Statistic Denmark, if I'm correct, and it looks like it's not possible for sharing the data. So we have managed to do our analysis in parallel in Denmark and Sweden. But it looks like even with DataShield, it won't be solved, and we have real issues. So I don't know if you are the right person, because it's more IT oriented problem. But I don't know if you have any input on that, because it looks like in Denmark now it's not possible to export data, and it looks like it will maybe become the case in even in Sweden and maybe Norway and all the Nordic countries with which we are collaborating. So I don't know how it will evolve, and do you have any input on that question?
I haven't heard about it before, and I think that, I mean, there are Danes using DataShield, I mean, Anne-Marie Nyborg Andersen, with whom I collaborate. I'm not sure whether she will collaborate with people from the other Nordic countries, but I'll have to check it. It might be, I mean, I think that, I mean, apart from the legal and ethical stumbling blocks, there may also be others. And I mean, there may be technological and institutional. I mean, it may be that Statistic Denmark will not give out data to other than Danish researchers, or if there is a close collaboration. So there are a number of other stumbling blocks, but those which are legal and ethical. And it might also be a technical issue. I mean, whether it's actually possible to transfer the data where they should be transferred in a summarized, in an aggregated format. But I mean, you are more than welcome to contact me, because I think it would be interesting to look into this case, because that is exactly what we are trying to look into in the new project I have with Anne-Marie. So I have your name here, and I can write you an email. I can find you at Karolinska, I'm sure.
Okay. But that would be wonderful, because as you said, it's on both levels. I think it's there are practical things that could be done, but there is also like legal things which are in each country.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So next would be Andre. Yes, Andre's next with his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Brilliant talk, as other people have said. One of the things that comes up in these kind of discussions, I think is hard perhaps for researchers, is the legal language. And we talk, a lot of it is orientated about risk, or a lot of broader society is aiming towards risk elimination, and we know that that's not possible. And so really it's about risk minimization and reducing the risk as much as possible of data being disclosive. But the language that's used in the legal text and some of the language that you presented is about things like reasonably likely, or means that are reasonably likely to identify the natural person, and so on. And so one question is about how to judge those kind of thresholds. How can we do that as an academic community? Is there, or as a research community, is there a way that we can do that? And then the other thing, I don't think you touched on this much, but the GDPR is obviously covers all kinds of data transfer, and a lot of it I think was more orientated towards the corporate world and preventing abuse of data by big companies and so on. And so there's kind of a balance between the interpretation for those kinds of data transfer and the kinds of data transfer that are used in research, which are kind of more solidaristic, as you said in your talk. So I just wondered if you had a comment about that as well.
Yeah, the legal language, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know that there's a clear answer to any of those questions.
I think, I mean, it's a really good point, because that was also why the reason why I walked you through these definition in the directive, because in the end, you do not really get wiser. I mean, you don't have a clear answer, which you need as a researcher, and especially if you are facing a big fine if you are doing it wrong. It's a matter of interpretation, and it could be interpreted very differently in one member state towards another. There are some guidelines from a European Data Protection Board, but really we don't have a clear answer before there has been a case before the EU Court of Justice, which resembles something that we are doing ourselves. I mean, so there might be a case where it has been questioned whether this is non-personal data or not, and if we have a clear answer from the courts, then we can sort of navigate. But until then, we have to live with this uncertainty. And I think what we can do is to give some examples. Would this be non-personal? Discuss it with the local data protection authorities to ensure that we are not being faced with a big fine. See what others have done and how it is perceived in other countries, and meet and discuss what would be non-personal data. That is the only way that we can actually clarify it. I'm sorry about that. This is why there is so many lawyers. We are producing them like, it's a sausage machine here in Copenhagen, at least, because we need people who can try to interpret. The transfer, I mean, the GDPR is not really specifically, promoting. Of course, it's concerned with things that has to do with economic activity, but research is also like potentially a huge economic activity. And it is clear that the GDPR acknowledges that there is something special about research and statistics, and actually also historical analysis. So everybody agree that there should be more leeway for research in using the data, because it's used for a purpose for which we can all profit. But the more specific details about the regulation is left for the national laws, and which gives us this situation of a lot of differences, which makes it very difficult to share data. And maybe Benedict's example here was, what he said could be an example of differences in the legislative framework in Sweden and Denmark, which all of a sudden also seems to impede the use of data shield and summary data, which is a bit surprising, but I will have to look into it.
Okay, great. And then I think our last question before we go to coffee is with Paul.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, first of all, Mesa, thanks also from me for an excellent talk. So two things I'd like to say. First one is a general issue, which echoes what Becca has just written into the group chat, which is that I think that there is no doubt that across the whole of the Data Shield project at all levels, we are aware that one of the biggest challenges for us now is to work with the people who are dealing with the governance and ethics frameworks at all levels, so that we can try to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing and that what the implications of that are. So I think that the work that you guys are doing in Copenhagen now, and I'm looking forward to next week's meeting, is really important in helping us to get the right messages across. And the specific point I wanted to make with that relates to what Benedict just said, which we have to be really careful with the terminology. So, for example, it is true that a lot of countries have rules about exporting data or sharing data, particularly across frontiers. But Data Shield doesn't either export data or share data. Data Shield enables people to get access to data in their normal secure positions, and therefore where they normally sit, and therefore our task is to make sure that people are dealing with the ethics and governance structures and the GDPR to make sure that they understand that that's what we're doing, so that we're not trying to put the data out anywhere.
Yeah, thank you for these important comments. Yeah, I think I completely agree. You need to, I mean, the governance people needs to understand exactly what is going on, which is also why I'm looking forward to get more insight. I had a brief presentation in Copenhagen, but the devil lies in the details. You need really to hands-on understand what is going on. I would, however, say that sharing could also be getting access to. I mean, that's also a question of definition. Yeah. So.
No.
Okay.
No, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So it's but I agree with you. I mean, that's also why it is so important that we're working together, because if you don't, I mean, you have to almost sit next to a person who is doing the analysis really to understand what is going on.
Yeah.
And this is what we intend to do. Yeah.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And I to be honest, there's as much of a responsibility on those of us doing the analysis and the development of data shield to understand what the people doing the governance are wanting as much as there is any other way. So it really is a two-way process that we've got to embark on.
It is, definitely.
All right.
Okay.
That's great. So once again, thank you for your great presentation. I think everyone enjoyed it. We've had some good questions. So now I think we're going to break for coffee. So we've got a half an hour break. We're going to keep the breakout rooms open. So if people want to stay on and chat to people, they're more than welcome to, or you can have a half an hour break away from the screen. We'll be back at 11 o'clock sharp when Paul is giving his talk about an introduction to Data Shield. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Becca or Ollie, is it okay to now stop this recording so we break up the recording chunks?
Yeah, we'll stop the recording. We'll start again in the next session.
Okay, I'm stopping it now.